Lebanese territory into Israeli territory were detected. A number of launches were intercepted and the rest fell in open areas. In a quick closing of the circle, aircraft attacked the launchers, from which some of the launchers into Israeli territory were detected. Following Hezbollah's response, the IDF struck southern Lebanon, killing a Hezbollah operative. This is the fourth time the IDF strikes deep inside Lebanese territory. The strike at El Osira ends a period of relative calm that had lasted around 10 days.
Well, with me in the studio, Dr. Michael Oren is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Thank you for staying with us, Michael. So, Yoav Gallant, the defence minister, he's known, isn't he, as one of the more hawkish voices in the war cabinet, in the government, against Hezbollah. Do you think he'll be seeking to persuade the Americans tonight that a diplomatic solution just isn't going to work with Hezbollah?
Well, the Americans do have a proposal on the table, a diplomatic proposal being led by veteran diplomat Amos Hochstein. The goal is to impose retroactively UN Resolution 1701 from 2006. It was forged by then Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, American Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. The idea was that Hezbollah would withdraw its forces about 20 miles north of our border, north of the Litani River, and that there be an interim force that would enter the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, and ensure a ceasefire between the two. Originally, that role was designed to be filled by UNIFIL. UNIFIL failed flagrantly. And now they're talking about putting in the Lebanese army in there. Now, there are two major problems here. One is that the United States and Israel disagree over Lebanon. The United States believes that there's a country called Lebanon. We think there's a country called Hezbollah. The United States believes that there is an entity known as the Lebanese army. We do not. Israel thinks that the Lebanese army is part of Hezbollah. So you're going to have Hezbollah guarding Hezbollah on the northern border. That's not going to work for Israel. And I also don't know what leverage the United States has right now that would convince Hezbollah to withdraw under Israeli fire, 20 miles to the north of that border. So barring that, the situation in the north of the part of the country remains intolerable. The entire part of the northern part of the country is uninhabitable. 60,000 people can't go back to their homes. Half of the IDF is bogged down. And now for several weeks, Hezbollah has outshot Hamas in terms of the number of rockets it fired at Israel every day. So it's an intolerable situation.
It has sustained its own losses as well, though. It has, Hezbollah has sustained some pretty heavy losses as well. More than 200 of its fighters have been killed.
Their arsenal of 150,000 rockets remain intact. Their military force of 1,000 terrorists remains pretty much unscathed. And a lot of it depends on Iran. If Iran gives Hezbollah the green light, Hezbollah will attack, as it did during the Syrian civil war. Hezbollah didn't want to get involved in the Syrian civil war, but Iran said, go, they went. And Hezbollah lost thousands of fighters fighting in Syria over the course of the decade after 2011. So we have precedent against this. My big fear, I got to tell you, Laura, is that Hezbollah will strike the first blow and not Israel. And those rockets are longer range, heavier, and very, very accurate. And while Hamas poses a tactical threat to the state of Israel, Hezbollah poses a strategic threat to the state of Israel. It can take out all of our major utilities, our airfields, our oil refineries, and Dimona.
A war with Hezbollah would look very different to a war with Hamas.
Full-scale war.
All right. Yeah. Dr. Michael Oren for now. Thank you. Well, there is another front in this war. Attacks by Iranian-backed proxies against American troops in Iraq and Syria. But after a robust response by US forces last month, the attacks do appear to have slowed. But now Iranian state media is claiming that those proxies have not given up. They've just switched their target and are now attacking Israeli assets. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Dr. Meir Javedanfar, Iran lecturer at Reichman University. Thank you very much for being with us, Meir. So there's no confirmation from the IDF or the Israeli government, but Iran, via its state media, has been making some pretty wild claims that its proxies in Iraq have attacked Haifa port, Ben Gurion airport, and others using drones. What are we to make of these claims?
Look, it is possible. The Iranians have given the Iraqi allies very sophisticated drones. It is possible. There was an incident in Ben Gurion a couple of days ago, although they didn't exactly say what it was. It's not beyond the Iranians to use Iraqi militia in order to attack Israel. They've done it before. They want to supplement Hezbollah because Hezbollah can only go so far. Hezbollah doesn't want to start a full-scale war with Israel because of the economic dire straits that Lebanon finds itself in. And also, the last time Israel and Hezbollah were in a war, it was in 2006. Iran was selling oil at somewhere between $100 to $130 a barrel. Now apparently it's around $60 a barrel that it's selling its oil. I mean, its economy, unlike 2006, is under heavy sanctions. So what I want to say is that war against Israel would be far costlier for Iran via Hezbollah than it was in 2006. The same, of course, for Hezbollah, which gets 75% of its income from Iran. So Iran has to be careful about how far it can go in terms of applying pressure on Israel using Hezbollah. So now it's using the Iraqis to do that. I mean, whether these attacks have been confirmed or not, it is very possible and credible that Iran would want to start relying on its Iraqi allies to pressure Israel on Gaza.
And looking more broadly, Dr. Javed Anfar, how do you think Iran views the way this war is going 5 months in terms of the war with Hamas and the failure to ignite the West Bank to the extent that it possibly wanted, and also the fighting with Hezbollah?
I think on the one hand, the Iranians are absolutely delighted by the reaction of the universities in the West, in the United States and Europe, and the people in the West who are calling for immediate ceasefire. It goes to show that the narrative that Iran and its tactical allies in this war, which is Qatar, their narrative is winning a lot of hearts and minds in the West, especially among the intellectual elite and among some of the university students and among some people in the press. If they were calling for simultaneous release of Israeli hostages as well as a ceasefire, then that would be different, but they're not, which is much to the delight of the Iranians. So that's a win for them. But they're also facing severe challenges, and Iran stands to lose Hamas and Jihad Islami controlling Gaza. That's what it looks like. It's not definite. It very much depends on how Israel manages its relations with the United States, but that's a separate conversation, Laura. In terms of Hezbollah is pressuring Israel. Again, there's so far that Hezbollah and the Houthis can go. They are trying their best, but for now, one of Iran's major concerns is to stop Hamas and Jihad Islami losing control of Gaza, because that would mean a strategic loss for Iran's axis of resistance, and that's why it's supplying Hezbollah, now apparently Iraqi militia, and the Houthis. Whether they will succeed, again, that will really depend on how we manage our relations with the United States, but that's a threat.
All right, Dr. Meir Javed Anfar, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael Oren is here with me in the studio. As you heard there, Dr. Javed Anfar talking about the relationship with Iran is linked to Israel's relationship with the United States.
And it's very difficult right now during a presidential year, because the United States is just not going to get into a face-to-face military fight with Iran. Iran's proxies in Iraq, in Syria, have fired some 200 attacks, launched 200 attacks against American bases there and in Jordan.
And at the same time, you've got the United States negotiating with the leadership in Baghdad about withdrawing its troops from Iraq.
And it also withdrew of the two carrier strike groups that were initially sent into this area, the Eisenhower and the Ford, have been sent. One has been sent back to the United States. In the Mandeb Straits, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, the United States is firing back at the Houthis, but it's not firing back at the Iranians, who are in many ways directing and supplying the Houthis. So Iran gets through this entire wave of violence throughout the Middle East, for which it bears a tremendous amount of responsibility without paying any price whatsoever. So it's very difficult for Israel to engage with the United States that refuses to take on Iran. Because the United States, at this point, certainly the Biden administration, is doing everything possible not to get involved in a war before November 2024. And that is what Rafah is about, and that's certainly what Iran is about.
All right, Dr. Michael Oren, thank you very much. Well, another front in the war, that is Yemen's Houthi rebels. Well, today they attacked a Chinese-owned oil tanker in the Red Sea, just 2 days after they promised to allow the safe passage of Chinese and Russian ships. The Houthis have vowed to target Israeli, British and American ships, as well as vessels heading to Israeli ports. They have wreaked chaos on shipping in this crucial channel, but the Huangpu was attacked by a series of missile strikes as well. Today, to talk more about that, we're joined by Tommy Steiner, Policy Director at the Signal Group. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And first of all, has there been any response at all from Beijing to this attack?
No, not that I've recorded, at least not this hour, and I doubt that we will see anything coming out from them before Monday morning their time.
How much of a problem are the Houthi attacks on shipping for China? Because one of the consequences has been
in the cost of shipping oil, which has risen to levels of, is increased by one figure that I saw just a month ago, then by 180% or so. So the costs have been on the rise, so has everything, in terms of shipping costs to and from China have gone up exponentially. So that's becoming an increasing concern and issue for the Chinese government and for its economy. That is not in a good shape.
Will China, or is it already perhaps using its leverage with Iran to try and get it to stop the Houthis from attacking ships?
Well, China has apparently limited leverage over Iran, which in turn has its own limited leverage over the Houthis. It's not as though China can say, stand still, and then the Iranians will stand still, and so will the Houthis fall in place. It doesn't work like that. Yes, there have been reports of negotiations and between the Chinese and the Houthis, and between the Houthis and the Russians, but nothing has been made public or official, at least. But in any case, it's hard to tell whether this was simply a misfiring today or something else of the kind. Misidentified shipping in that lane. So that could have been the case also. I wouldn't put too much emphasis on this incident, but it is interesting to show that the Chinese continue sending their ships, or at least some of their ships, through the Red Sea.
How is China exploiting or using the current crisis in the Middle East to its own advantage, would you say?
Well, it is trying to exploit it to its advantage. However, I think the crisis in the Middle East has not done well to China's standing in the international community and vis-a-vis the United States, because at the end of the day, China, and one of the first indications, I think, in my mind, is that there has been very limited high-level Chinese engagement in the region since October 7. If I'm not mistaken, the Chinese foreign minister has shown up in the Middle East only once, and that was in Egypt earlier in the year, and that was part of his annual trip to Africa. So in that respect, Chinese engagement in the region has been very limited. They have been finding it very difficult to influence events and to show themselves to be a major country as they aspire to be.
Tommy Steiner at Signal, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, it's one of the biggest jihadist attacks on European soil to date. ISIS-K, an offshoot of the Islamic State group that emerged in Syria and Iraq over a decade ago, has claimed responsibility for an attack on a concert in Moscow. At least 133 people were killed and many more were wounded. This report from CNN's Fred Pleitgen.
The burned-out shell of the Crocus City Hall just outside Moscow. Even half a day after the attacks, parts of the rubble still smoldering. The local governor surveying the places where gunmen killed so many. 2 here and 3 there, Governor Andrei Vorobyov asks. 3 here, they say. Hundreds of firefighters still on the scene of what Russian President Vladimir Putin called, quote, a bloody and...
In all regions of the country, additional anti-terrorist and anti-sabotage measures have been introduced. The main thing now is to prevent those who are behind this bloodbath from committing a new crime.
It was Friday evening when the attackers went on their rampage, firing at people point blank, eyewitnesses say, killing men, women, and children, then setting the concert hall ablaze. Friends and family standing by, hoping for news of their loved ones, authorities searching for the many still missing. I don't know what to do, this man says, desperate for news of his wife. I feel completely hopeless. Moscow's hospitals flooded with dozens of injured. Russian authorities say the death toll will likely continue to rise.
Thank you in advance for your patience.
The U.S. said it had warned Moscow about the threat of a terror attack, and ISIS has claimed responsibility. But Russian authorities seem intent on blaming someone else. After several arrests overnight, the Kremlin pointing the finger at Kyiv.
All four direct perpetrators of the terrorist attack, all those who shot and killed people, were found and detained. They tried to hide and move towards Ukraine, where, according to preliminary data, a window was prepared for them on the Ukrainian side to cross the state border.
Ukraine denies the allegations, Kyiv saying they had nothing to do with the attack. Near the scene of the attack, many are laying flowers in memory of the victims. Vladimir Putin has declared Sunday a day of mourning, promising a Russia united in grief and retribution and oblivion for those behind the attack.
So what is ISIS-K and why did it launch this brutal attack on Russia? To talk more about that, we're joined by Scott Stewart, Vice President of Intelligence at Torchstone Global. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And many in the West had believed that ISIS had been defeated some years ago. This attack suggests it has managed to regroup.
Oh, it hasn't been defeated at all. Anybody who's been paying close attention can see the activities that they've been conducting, not only in Afghanistan, Pakistan, into peripheral countries like Iran, but also look at what the Islamic State group and really the network has been doing across Africa, whether it's Mozambique, Central African Republic, Nigeria. They're still very alive and well and very active.
And so what is the response to this? Is there any coordinated response?
Well, I mean, the response is obviously to try to find the cells where they're at. And also, I mean, first of all, we have to figure out exactly what happened and how it was conducted. It's still not clear whether this was a cell that was sent into Moscow by one of the affiliates, such as Islamic State Khorasan, or whether this was just grassroots jihadists who were already residing in Russia and decided to conduct an attack in support of the Islamic State. I think it's important that when we look at the claims of responsibility from the Islamic State so far, it's come from the main group and from their news agency, and not from one of the franchise groups, say Islamic State Khorasan.
Right, and this is, as I said, another offshoot of the ISIS that is perhaps better known, ISIS that emerged in Syria and Iraq. I was going to ask you, how much coordination do you think there is between the two groups?